To get started?
Yes, let's do it.
All right, let's do some introductions. Danae, can
I
you kick
love
us off?
Chris's Raise the Roof.
Today, why don't you introduce yourself?
Oh, so I'll start. So my name is Danae. I am hello, can you hear me? I just had a glitch.
You're freezing a little bit, but we can hear you.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. So I am a senior digital accessibility specialist at the University of North Texas. I've been in the higher ed field for, that says 12 years, but a little over 13 years. In roles relative to helping students access resources, with helping students with limited access to resources. I've been in my current role for 5 years, where I advocate for students with disabilities by teaching faculty, third-party vendors, and higher ed stakeholders about the importance of digital accessibility. And I am happy to be here.
Thank you. And Chris?
Everybody, I am Dr. Chris McDonald. I pretty much anything that you can think of in higher ed, I have done from student support to converting our entire 64 campus SUNY system from one LMS to another. I've taught in PA and in New York, big into, of course, accessibility and helping instructors get to that because the ultimate goal is our kids.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Uh, and I am Rachel Comerford. I'm the Senior Director of Accessibility at Macmillan Learning, and my day is spent leading some cross-functional efforts that ensure that students have access to all of their course materials. So let's get started. Accessibility is fundamentally about ensuring that every learner has equal opportunity to engage and participate and succeed. And I think that I'm likely preaching to the choir here, but I think it is important to say that it's not about legal compliance first. It's about upholding these core values of education. This is about equity and inclusion, about respect for human diversity. They're values that are reflected in the work that we do every day by implementing universal design for learning, by using inclusive design frameworks that support learners. It's an important part of remembering that accessibility is a design mindset, and it's not an afterthought or an accommodation process. And accessibility isn't just a moral good, right? It's a smart strategy and a legal necessity. So whether you're trying to communicate its importance to a colleague or a manager or even a friend, there are plenty of really simple and straightforward arguments that can be made from the ethical, which is it is about doing the right thing. Our systems and content should not exclude people with disabilities. We should not be reinforcing inequity. To a strategic approach, which is that accessible design supports better outcomes. It has a broader outreach and improved learner satisfaction. It helps everyone, just like curb cuts and captions. To the legal approach, which is that there's increasing enforcement of accessibility laws, especially in digital spaces, and compliance is now a baseline. It's not a bonus. So beyond these arguments, we want to note that institutions are also increasingly judged by their commitment to accessibility, which I love. But positive reputations attract partnerships, students, and funding. On the flip side, lawsuits and poor accessibility reviews are going to damage trust. Additionally, there are accessibility audits and rankings from organizations like WebAIM and EDUCAUSE that are becoming way more public and influential. And finally, the reason that I think many of you are here is that we're in the middle of a regulatory sea change. So there's Title II of the ADA, which has been updated and mandates that WCAG 2.1 AA compliance be applied to all higher ed institutions. And the EAA, the European Accessibility Act, which will impact US companies with digital products sold in the EU. And that includes publishers like Macmillan and edtech platforms. These changes mean that accessibility is a global standard. It's not a local compliance issue. So the question is, or isn't, should we prioritize accessibility? It's whether we're ready to meet these rising expectations that are coming. So let's dig into what's changing. And we'll start with Danae. Can you walk us through it?
Definitely. So the Title II amendments has been a hot topic lately, right? Um, Ever since the DOJ made their announcement that they're amending Title II and including a new subpart, which is subpart H, I think we've been we've been in this uproar almost where people are saying, oh, we have to meet this new Title II amendment, which is true, we do. But Title II has been around for a very long time, right? It's been around since 1990. It's coming up on its 35th anniversary here. So it's important to know that we need to we need to continue to do what we've been doing to meet Title II. But this new amendment includes web and mobile accessibility mandates, right? So some things to know. So let's just start with what ADA is, right? It is a law that protects the rights of people with disabilities to ensure that they get the services that they need in an equitable way. And this new subpart is basically ensuring that people with disabilities can be independent, right, and private and have private access to getting the services that they need from public entities. So the deadline to comply for this is April 24th of 2026 if you're serving a population of 50,000 or more. If you're serving a population of 49,000 or less, the deadline is April 26th of 2027. So you have a little bit more time if you're a smaller entity. And what's changing? You have to meet WCAG 2.1 level AA standards. And so WCAG guidelines basically are standards for accessibility guidelines online. So it covers needs like low vision, hearing loss, mobility, cognitive disabilities, and more. And so one of the main things that's changing is third-party vendors, right? So higher ed uses a lot of tools that are online that students probably need within their respective fields, right? And so it's important that these tools and softwares are reviewed for accessibility to ensure that they're not only providing accessible content, and if they're not, they have some type of roadmap to meet accessible standards by the deadline. And so to meet these deadlines, you have to kind of put in put a plan in place to not only review and take inventory of what you're using via web or mobile applications, but actually prioritize what needs to be done to make that content accessible. So some exceptions include old social media posts, archived web content, password protected personal documents, independent third-party posts not under contract, and pre-existing documents not used for services. So these are things that don't have to meet the new rule or law. But it's also very important to know that accommodations still must be made if someone requests access to those things, even if it's old or archived, right? Another thing to mention that is important that's not on the slide is conforming to alternate versions. So if content can't be made accessible, you can create an accessible version that is equitable to the original service or software or website, right? So keeping in mind that if your content isn't accessible, try to think of a way that you can create an accessible alternative. That is allowed, but sparingly, right? Don't do it with everything, but that is an option. Also, there's some flexibility if you're in some type of hardship. So let's say you have an undue financial or administrative burden. You won't be required to meet accessibility guidelines if you can prove that it will affect your services provided, right? But again, this is sparingly. And so I wanted to go over what web content accessibility guidelines are, because I know we hear WCAG 2.1 level AA often, but we don't know what it is exactly. So just briefly, it covers a wide range of recommendations for making web content more accessible, right? So following these guidelines will make a wider range of people with disabilities be able to access and be accommodated within your services or within the software that you provide.
Now, Danae,
So,
sorry, there's a question in the chat for you before you keep
okay,
going. Angela asked you, I thought EEAAPs were taken out of ADA Title II update. Can you speak to that?
what was taken out? I'm sorry.
The
Double
equally
APs.
effective accessibility action plans.
I'm a visual person. I need to see it.
Angela, I think it's a great question. Well, Danae brings it up. I'm actually not sure.
They were ever within the Title II. Amendment.
I'm not sure about the EEAAPs because, of course, everything has to be an acronym. I do know that EIT reports are still happening.
And can you tell us what the EIT report is?
Yeah, so later in our presentation, EIT, another acronym, stands for Electronic Information Technology Accessibility Plans.
Great, thank you so much. And Chris, as long as you're at it, why don't you walk us through the different legislation that is out there? I know I hear a lot of confusion between ADA and the different sections, so.
Absolutely. That's why we wanted to make sure that we included this. So there are similarities and differences between what ADA is, which has been in effect since 1978, give or take a year or two. And then there's section 508. So the things that they have in common on the left, both of these impact institutions, but also instructors individually, which many times faculty don't realize that they can be held accountable by themselves. Both can definitely lead to fines, again, for the institution or for the individual faculty member, lawsuits. Usually if you get fined or get taken to court, your reputation gets a little hairy for a bit. And they both can lead to new regulations. So much to what Danae said, even though Title II has been around for a while, we have some new regulations, kind of popping up. So the differences. So as Danae alluded to earlier, the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, that is a civil right that everybody has a right to physical and digital access to things. So Rachel mentioned the curb cut earlier. If you're not sure what that is, when you walk up to a sidewalk and there's that dip in the curb, so wheelchairs can easily roll up. That's an example of ADA, for example, or that when you go in a bathroom, there's a handicap stall. But all of that also applies to higher ed. In ADA, the actual person who was victimized, for lack of a better term. So if I need something and I was not provided it, I myself as an individual can go after the institute, can file a complaint, go after sounds bad, with the institution and or the instructor. So sometimes institutions can show due diligence, but if the instructor is like, meh, no biggie, the institution might be like, cool beans, and now the instructor is held to that standard. Section 508, which is where EIT comes in, is just about digital materials, websites, third-party tools. Digital materials includes anything and everything you are going to put in an LMS. So even though it's not public facing like a university website might be, it's still digital and it's out there to the end users. But in this case, it is for federally funded, it is for federal companies. So basically, if you work for a federal company, but a lot of states have gone, okay, yeah, we're going to do that too. And sometimes states make it more strict. The state or the Department of Justice is the one who brings forth the complaints.
So, Chris, what happens if there is a complaint? What happens if the school doesn't do something?
So glad you asked, Rachel. So there are a lot of issues if nobody does anything or if no one does nothing. And again, this is about due diligence. So institutions can show due diligence by holding workshops, having training sessions, things like this that we're doing today. And then if instructors choose not to follow it, that's when it becomes an individual issue. So, and I'm stressing this because in my work with faculty, usually faculty don't necessarily realize, they think it's kind of an overarching thing for whatever company or institution they work for and not them directly, but it can be. And I'm saying this not to scare anybody, but so that, what was it when we were kids? Knowledge is power. If you as an instructor know this, then even if your institution might not be doing anything to make your stuff accessible, you can hold up your due diligence. So as you can see, again, because of those differences between ADA and 508, the fines are different. So when we talk about first violation and additional violations, so I'm at the second row, that means, let's say you are, I saw someone earlier who's working in, wow, I just lost the name of that LMS, Canvas. First violation would be maybe the one document. That just doesn't mean the first time you get called on the carpet. Each additional violation are all of the other items in that course that are also not accessible. So somebody is in the Q&A is making videos, but that's fantastic. Not if it's not accessible. So think of, I know we have a lot of instructors in here. Think of how many things you have in your course, whether you're teaching in person or online, or async or sync or hybrid or high flex. And then do the math. That's a lot. That's a lot of cheddar. So we already talked about lawsuits as far as who can bring them forward. So results are different in that ADA accreditation can become an issue, especially for those under middle states. Usually when you have these kinds of violations, your accrediting body is notified. So if you're doing a self-study and you're up for renewal, good luck. It's all fixable. And that's why we're doing this preventatively rather than reactively. And as far as 508 goes, that's where the WCAG standards came from. And those WCAG standards change. That's why we are at 2.1, and I believe 2.2 is very close behind. And there
2.2 has actually been released. There's active work on 2.3 now.
Thanks. And then there's the different levels of meeting, you know, single A, double A, triple A. You're at least shooting for double A, and I'm not talking baseball. And, you know, then you are under more scrutiny. You're kind of really under fire more so.
Thank you.
Sure. Now that I've
in
scared everyone.
In addition to the federal legislation, it's also important to note that there's an increasing amount of state and local legislation. I've included a handful of examples here, but this is not an exhaustive list. Just to walk through them really quickly, in Maryland, we have MD 7910, which is that each local Board of Education and public agency has to comply with WCAG 2.1 AA when they're purchasing or selecting digital resources. And that's basically the same as what the Title II update says as well. And of course, if any of those abbreviations that we're throwing out there, the WCAG or W3C or any of that, just come out in the Q&A, ask us questions. We're happy to clarify with more information. In Maryland, failure to reach those standards might result in fines or penalties. In Missouri, it's very similar. There's the Missouri State ICT Standard 3.0, which was initiated in 2024. And this is that state information systems, tools, and content have to comply, again, with WCAG 2.1 AA. As well as Section 508, of course. And this is, again, very similar to the Title II update. That includes the Missouri State Education Policy, and there are also some penalties associated with not meeting those guidelines. And then there's Colorado, which has HB 21-1110. Love reading these out loud. And that is that digital materials have to conform to the Office of Information Technology rules for accessibility. And in Colorado, if violations could lead to court orders, monetary damages, attorney's fees, and fines. And so there's a lot of risk associated with these state legislations. Now, that's just a broad overview. There are certainly other examples that are out there, and it's important to keep track, depending on where you are, of what new legislation is up and coming. So before
Rachel,
yep.
I'm so sorry. Before we get to this, I just wanted to, for anyone who's not sure, WCAG, WCAG stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So it's basically the chart of stuff we need to follow.
Yeah, so I was going to mention that earlier. So it consists of, right, 4 principles, the core principles: perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust, right? And under these principles are guidelines with success criterion. So level AA, 2.1 level AA includes 50 success criterions that basically gives you tips on how to make content accessible in a digital format. And so I think it's important that WCAG is talked about more because we throw those acronyms out and people are like, okay, we've heard of WCAG, but what is it, right? And so it's a step-by-step guide on how to make content accessible, essentially. And so I'm glad you brought that back up, Chris, because I wanted to mention that.
Absolutely. And if anybody Googles WCAG, they can actually get that chart. But I don't want to hold Rachel up.
Of course, no, this is great. Before we jump into strategies and solutions, it's really important to sort of pause and reflect on where you are in your process. I asked some of the attendees as they logged in to tell us a bit about where they are in their accessibility journey, and I appreciate everyone's really thoughtful input. Feel free to continue to post in our Q&A. This set of questions can help you assess where your institution or department is in terms of readiness to both meet the spirit and the letter of the accessibility expectations. And so I'll walk through it. Our first question is, do instructors and administrators understand the relevant legal requirements and upcoming deadlines? And this includes not just knowing that laws like ADA or Section 508 exist, but also understanding how they apply to digital content platforms and instruction. So with the 2024 ADA Title II update and the 2025 European Accessibility Act coming into effect, knowing the timelines and the implications is crucial. You want to gauge awareness across leadership and faculty, and if there's uncertainty or reliance on outdated info, that is a flag for proactive education or policy review. There was a question about courses and conferences or workshops that can be enrolled in. Chris, I think you had an answer for this.
I don't, as far as Macmillan, I would of course defer that to you. There are tons of them that are out there. And Deanna, thanks for the website for the WCAG standards.
Great. Danae, do you want to speak a little bit to your university's approach to understanding the relevant legal requirements and the upcoming deadlines?
For sure. So there were accessibility task force teams created out of the need to comply, right? And one for every campus within our UNT system. So UNT systems consist of UNT of North Texas, which is in Denton, UNT of Dallas, and then the Health Science Center. So we're different campuses, but under one umbrella. And so there was a task force for the system, and then each campus had their own task force. I'm a part of the Denton task force. And Our effort began with identifying third-party softwares, websites, and mobile applications that each sector of the university uses, which turns out to be hundreds, right? And so um, we first started with the public-facing and commonly used websites and applications where we prioritize those aspects first. We did accessibility checks. We use site improves on websites, and there's an initiative to collect and request VPATs for all software taking place right now. Accessibility remediations have also began. We have support from our leaders forming training initiatives across UNT systems. So for example, deans across the UNT Dallas campus were provided with accessibility summaries of their courses for the past year from a third-party accessibility scanning tool. And I think somebody mentioned it in the comments. You do it. And faculty will be trained on remediation practices in August, and the provost wants remediation completed before December 31st. So this is one way you can go about strategically coming up with a plan to train and then put in action how to meet the compliance, right? Within my specific division, the Division of Strategy and Innovation, we have a team of accessibility testers who are assistive technology users who test software and content from their point of view. So we have one that uses a screen reader, a refreshable braille display, and a magnification tool. And just having their input is very, very important. So if you are starting a process where you're reviewing content for accessibility, it's important to include individuals with disabilities who uses assistive technology to get their input. And I think the overall goal, right, is sustainability. And throughout this process, to me, I've realized that it's going to require time and experience. So that is what we're doing here at UNT.
That is great. I love it. Our second question was, are most instructional materials and digital tools actively maintained for accessibility? It's one thing to create accessible materials, but accessibility is not like one and done. You want to see if video captions are applied, if audio description is applied. Are the slide decks properly structured? Are LMS platforms checked after updates? Are vendors being regularly vetted for compliance? So you need to emphasize the need for this ongoing remediation and monitoring, not just the initial conformance. So this is going to include syllabus templates, accessibility checklists, procurement guidelines in your evaluation. And Chris, you have a lot of experience with this. So what recommendations would you make?
As far as this is a big question, only because typically people look at this and go, oh my God, where do we start? Like this is like fitting the entire double whopper in your mouth all at once. Knowledge for instructors, which we're going to get to, is incredibly important. The best way to check instructional materials are through software that I've utilized so many pieces of software within LMSs. We have someone in the Q&A previously who's using Canvas who mentioned one. Usia Panorama is fantastic, and I'm not sponsored. Blackboard Ally, even though the version of it is kind of the same as it was 10 years ago, it still works. When you have those integrated within an LMS, not only can they give you your course report. They can also give you all of your courses, and the LMS administrator can also run data on the entire university, which I've done before. And then kind of faculty in my experience love when I would send them their reports about their courses. It also tends to show, the big red, oh my God, these need to be fixed immediately, which are usually PDF issues. But there are a lot of tools that can help with that. But I saw that we have some CLT Writing Center people here with us. If it's in, it might be an other duty as assigned in your job description, but if you are someone who has access to these kinds of reports, who can show faculty how to run them, who can get them to faculty, it is a big, big help in my experience.
Along those lines, you want to ask yourself if staff and faculty have access to training for accessibility and compliance, because even the most well-intentioned educators, they can't act on what they don't know. So make sure that accessibility training is a part of onboarding, it's a part of professional development, it's a part of the course process design. Highlight the importance of role-specific training, what a faculty member needs to know might differ from like what an LMS admin needs to know or what an IT lead needs to know. And make sure that there's different types of training that are available. Something that's on demand or just in time can be very valuable for teams that are really busy. And Chris, knowing that we have not a lot of leeway on the time right now, can you give us just a little bit of information about training programs that you've designed in the past?
Absolutely. For the SUNY system, I helped design different asynchronous courses for those different tiers, as you mentioned, whether it's the LMS admin, instructional designer. But what I also did on a more local level for any of our teaching and learning people is not only did I host small workshops where literally people just signed on and asked anything, but I would record those with their permission and then post them. I also made my own departmental website that it was just a Google site that everybody had access to. I also made a course within our LMS that had all the same information with, I call them cheat sheets, but written and video recording of here's how to make a Word document accessible. Here's how to make it, because really, if you start in Word and make that accessible, you can do anything. But just because of time, those are some of the quick things that I've done. And the one-on-one appointments are also incredibly important. And I always think it's very important to thank every single person who's here, who shows up, who wants more, because it can be very difficult for educators or people in higher ed to admit they don't know something. There are so many who I know everything kind of people. So I always thank them for their vulnerability and trust. And same for those hanging out in the Q&A.
So our fourth question in the readiness assessment is, do students know how to request accommodations or report access issues? If your students know how to reach you, they were more likely to reach out and actually do it. And awareness among students is just as important. Do they know where to go for support? Is the process transparent? Is the process accessible? Are you asking them to fill out a form that their screen reader can't access? And look at how easily a student can find and use their accessibility services, especially new or online only students. Is that information publicly available to them? Is it easy to find if you search on the college website? Consider if there are proactive communications in the syllabi and websites and LMS portals. Are you telling students at the beginning of their course if you want help or you need an accommodation? These are the resources that are available to do it. And then number 5 is accessibility integrated into institutional planning, reviews, and goals? So this is the clearest sign of maturity for me in terms of readiness, which is that accessibility has gone from being reactive support to being a strategic priority. And so you want to ask yourself if accessibility is showing up in your strategic plans, in your budget allocations, in accreditation prep, and in quality assurance processes. This is my favorite part of the job. When I'm invited to a meeting to ask all of the questions about whether something is accessible, and I open up the meeting agenda and all that information is already there. It means that nobody, including myself, has to hear the sound of my voice any more than I or they want to. Um, and this integration, it signals compliance, but it also signals a commitment. You are telling your students and telling your instructors that this is important. So think of this slide as both a diagnostic and a roadmap. If the answer to any of these questions is unclear, or if the answer is just a flat no, that's a really great place to start building capacity and planning for the accessibility regulations that are upcoming. And now that we have this, Danae and Chris are going to introduce some key starting points for making accessible physical and digital experiences for students. So Danae, can you kick us off?
Sure. So what does accessibility look like? I think the first step, and this is very, very basic, but it's to state it, commit to it, right? Accessibility means extending the invitation to students with disabilities and being fully equipped to support them when they arrive, right? And so not just extending the invitation, but being prepared when they come into your classrooms or your campuses. Already think about the barriers they may the barriers that they may come across and try to remove them beforehand. So accessibility, it reflects a commitment to inclusivity. It's taking the stand, saying we provide an inclusive environment and we expect everyone to have a user-friendly experience when engaging with our services. And this includes students with hidden or non-apparent disabilities. Students who don't declare their disabilities and students who aren't disabled but will still benefit from these policies, because not all students' disabilities are apparent, and not all students want to share that they have a disability. The second thing is to comply, right? Ensure that services you provide are properly tested and remediated to meet WCAG 2.1 standards. And then accommodate. Even if you've complied, you've removed barriers, you've prepared, students may still encounter issues, right? So when your users encounter issues or barriers while using your services or content, find a way to remove the barrier in a reasonable time frame.
Great. And what about building accessible courses? I'm sorry, classrooms. Starting with classrooms, going into courses. I got ahead of myself.
No, that's okay. Sorry, I was, are the recordings or info mentioned available for viewing? Sorry, I was reading the Q&A.
Okay, well, we are running a little bit short on time.
Physical space. As far as accessible classrooms, probably one of the best practices for furniture are actually the tables and chairs that are on casters. A lot of higher ed still have those seats that have like the desk comes out and flips down, and it's very difficult for people in wheelchairs, people with hidden, invisible, whatever you want to call them, disabilities. So you can read this yourself. I don't like when I don't need to read it to you, but for instructors, it's really great to give options. That's the biggest thing, especially for those who are neurodiverse. Perhaps they need to walk or pace to be able to concentrate. Perhaps they need to keep in an earbud because they're listening to music that also helps them pay attention. The drawing, the doodling. I had one student who used to need to stick his fingers out the window to feel the breeze. And none of those things were things that I should discipline because they all kept the students with me. So the traditional classroom of the past is gone. And I've had faculty say, I'm not babying them. That's babying them. And no. And I have a lot of other things to say about that comment. And so, it's in, I'm like, I know I wrote it in a bullet points, bottom one here. As far as courses go, you want to, of course, design according to UDL, use ADDIE and SAM and all of those principles. And if you don't know those acronyms, that's fine too. But options are really important because not only of equity, but of accessibility. If you have a student and your assignment is write a paper, perhaps they can do that better verbally because they have a physical ailment that makes their fingers hurt, or they don't know how to use Dragon naturally speaking, or they can't afford it. So give them opportunities. All accessible materials I already mentioned, make them accessible first, then pop them into PDFs. Yes, you can OCR PDFs, but it still doesn't fully tag them. And that is difficult on the back end. I already mentioned that. There are also some free software. So color blindness isn't necessarily considered a disability that would grant a student accommodations. However, you can let them make an envelope in your LMS of free tools. There's a website, Visolve. If you are colorblind or a student is, it changes the screen based on their type of color blindness. So there was someone in the Q&A asking about art. There you go. Read Write, Orbit Note. Those are fabulous screen readers. And there are also Google extensions that offer free screen readers for people. Using magnifiers, color contrast tools, giving those audio files, transcripts, not just for someone with an accommodation or a disability. You have an adult learner and they just put their baby to bed, and the only way they're going to be able to do the homework you want them to do is to read the transcript instead of listening to your recording. So you give them every chance to succeed. And if you don't believe in that, that's a bigger problem.
So we've looked at the why behind accessibility. We talked about getting started in your physical and digital classrooms. I want to end us on a high-level overview of what progress looks like. And so this is a roadmap that's meant to sort of break down your institution's accessibility journey into 5 actionable phrases, beginning with awareness and assessment. So your goal here is to understand where you are today. Are faculty aware of accessibility requirements? Do you have an accurate picture of your environment? Take inventory of where you are. Phase 2 is about planning and prioritization. So once you have an understanding of your landscape, set goals, make choices. What are you fixing first? What can you reasonably tackle this semester, this summer, this coming fall? And this phase is really going to involve cross-functional committees that align accessibility efforts with strategic priorities. Then we move on to capacity building. That's where we see momentum building. It has training for faculty and staff. There's hiring of accessibility specialists. There's creating resources like templates that are already accessible so your instructors can drop content in there. Checklists, toolkits. It's a great place to start evaluating and onboarding technology that helps support accessibility and your accessibility goals. Then we go into implementing and monitoring. So now you're actively creating accessibility content, you're auditing courses and platforms, you're using tools like Blackboard Ally and Panorama, which we mentioned before, that will track your progress, and you're monitoring to ensure that you're not just checking a box, that you're making a real and lasting change for students. And then phase 5, this is evaluation and continuous improvement. So accessibility isn't one and done. It's a phase that helps you build feedback loops and connect and collect data from student outcomes, refine practices. And it's also where accessibility becomes integrated into the institutional reviews and the long-term planning. So each milestone builds on the last, and while the path isn't always linear, having this structure helps institutions take meaningful and manageable steps toward digital inclusion. And as I mentioned, this is a high-level overview of these steps, but if you join me again in October, we'll have speakers from, I believe it's Indiana University, and maybe Ashley can remind me where else. And we'll be going through this high-level overview and digging into the details of each of these steps. So our key takeaways, and while I walk through these, I would love if anybody has any other questions or comments to drop them in the Q&A. I know we have very little time left, but we will happily answer questions over email if you have your name in the Q&A area. But what we want you to take away from this is that accessibility is an ethical, strategic, and legal imperative, that the compliance deadlines are approaching, that inaction comes with high costs, that accessibility is going to benefit all your learners, and that roadmaps require coordination and commitment across your teams. For those of you that were interested in conferences and trainings, I did post in the chat a list of upcoming conferences throughout the year. There's also a link in the chat to the EDUCAUSE training that was mentioned previously. So we will also grab these and drop them into the slide deck so that you get them as a part of the email resources that go out to everybody.